I was helping my 7-year-old grandson Noah with his homework when I read the words that made my blood freeze. My real grandma lives in the basement, but she's very sick and can't come upstairs anymore. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. I don't have a basement. I've lived in this single-story house for 30 years, and I see Noah every Tuesday and Thursday. So who was this mysterious grandmother he was writing about? And why did my daughter-in-law Tasha suddenly look so nervous when she came to pick him up? Thanks for being here. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where this story found you. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and golden sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as Noah sat at my old oak table, his tongue poking out in concentration. His assignment was simple: write about your family members and what makes them special. I'd been looking forward to seeing what he'd write about me, maybe something about my famous chocolate chip cookies or the stories I tell about his daddy when Eric was little. But as I read over his shoulder, my coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. "Noah, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I knelt to clean up the ceramic pieces. "Can you tell Grandma Clara about this other grandmother you wrote about?" His bright brown eyes looked up at me with the innocent confusion that only children possess. "Oh, that's the sick grandma. Mama Tasha takes me to see her sometimes when Daddy's at work. She lives in the basement and she knows lots of stories about Daddy too, just like you do." My heart hammered against my ribs. I've been a single woman living in this ranch-style house since my husband James passed 15 years ago. There is no basement. There has never been a basement. Yet here was my precious grandson, matter-of-factly telling me about regular visits to see another grandmother who supposedly lived beneath us. "Noah, baby, what basement? Grandma's house doesn't have a basement." He giggled as if I'd made a silly joke. "Not here, Grandma Clara, at the other house. The one where we go on Wednesdays sometimes. Mama Tasha says the lady is too sick to come upstairs, so we have to go down to see her. She's really old, and she cries sometimes, but she makes me feel better when I tell her about school." Every word felt like ice water in my veins. Wednesdays. The days when Tasha supposedly took Noah to the park, or for errands while Eric worked late at the construction company. The days when I offered to babysit, but was always told they had other plans. "Does this grandmother have a name, sweetie?" "She told me to call her Grandma Evelyn, but Mama Tasha says I shouldn't talk about her too much because it might make you sad since you're getting old too." Grandma Evelyn. The name hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself as fragments of old conversations suddenly made terrible sense. Tasha's odd questions about my health, her suggestions that I might want to slow down and let them handle more of Noah's care, Eric's recent comments about how tired I seemed, how maybe they should reduce my babysitting days. The front door opened with its familiar creak, and I heard Tasha's voice calling out in that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Noah, time to go, baby. Mama's here." I watched my daughter-in-law walk into the kitchen, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, her smile bright and practiced. But when her eyes landed on Noah's homework spread across the table, that smile flickered for just a moment. It was barely a second, but I caught it. The flash of panic before she regained control. "What's my favorite boy working on today?" she asked, but her voice had an edge I'd never noticed before. Noah beamed up at her. "I wrote about all my grandmas, Mama, even the sick one in the basement." Tasha's laugh sounded forced, almost hysterical. "Oh, honey, you and your imagination. You know how kids are, Clara, always making up stories." But I was watching her hands. They were shaking as she gathered Noah's backpack, and when she reached for his homework, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Relief. She was relieved to be taking that paper away. "Actually, I'd like to keep a copy of Noah's work," I said quietly, "for my scrapbook." "Oh, that's not necessary," Tasha said quickly. "The teacher needs the original, and we're running late for Noah's dentist appointment." Dentist appointment? On a Tuesday, when his regular dentist was closed. I walked them to the door, kissing Noah goodbye and watching as Tasha hurried him to her car with unusual urgency. As they drove away, I stood in my doorway with questions spinning through my mind like a hurricane. Who was Grandma Evelyn? Where was this mysterious basement? And why did my daughter-in-law look like a woman with secrets when my grandson innocently mentioned visiting another grandmother? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Tasha over the past 2 years. Her interest in my finances, her questions about my insurance policies, her suggestions that I update my will to make things easier for the family. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what was happening on those Wednesday visits, and I was going to discover who Grandma Evelyn really was. Wednesday morning arrived with autumn's crisp air, and my nerves stretched tight as piano wire. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with plans and possibilities. At exactly 2:30 p.m., I positioned myself in my car 3 blocks from Noah's school, waiting. I felt like a detective in one of those crime shows Eric used to watch, except this wasn't fiction. This was my family, my grandson, and someone named Grandma Evelyn, who supposedly lived in a basement that didn't exist. At 3:15, I spotted Tasha's silver Honda pulling away from the school pickup line, with Noah's little head visible in the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I followed at a careful distance, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to track their route. Instead of heading toward the park or the shopping center where Tasha claimed to take Noah on Wednesdays, she drove in the opposite direction, toward the older part of town where houses sat on larger lots behind overgrown hedges and privacy fences. 20 minutes later, she turned into a neighborhood I'd never visited before. The houses here were older, some well-maintained, others showing signs of neglect. Large oak trees created a canopy over narrow streets, and many properties were hidden behind tall fences or thick landscaping. Tasha's car disappeared into the driveway of a modest 2-story house on Elm Street. The property was surrounded by a 6-foot wooden fence, and the house itself looked tired, with peeling paint and shutters that hung slightly crooked. Nothing about it suggested wealth or comfort, which struck me as odd. Tasha was always particular about appearances, always wanted the best of everything. I parked across the street, partially hidden behind a delivery truck, and watched. Within minutes, I saw Tasha and Noah walk around to the side of the house. They disappeared from view, but I could see they were heading toward what looked like an external entrance, the kind of door that might lead to a basement. My heart pounded as I realized Noah hadn't been making up stories. There really was a basement. There really was someone down there. But who? I waited in my car for 2 hours, checking my watch every few minutes and jumping at every sound. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional dog walker or delivery truck breaking the silence. No one paid attention to the grandmother sitting in an old sedan, watching a house where her grandson was supposedly visiting another grandmother. At 5:30, I saw movement. Noah emerged first, followed by Tasha. Even from across the street, I could see that Noah looked different, subdued. His usual bouncing energy was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness that made my chest ache. Tasha, on the other hand, looked agitated. She kept checking her phone and glancing around nervously as she hurried Noah to the car. Before they left, she made a phone call, pacing back and forth beside her vehicle while gesturing animatedly. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language screamed frustration and anxiety. As they drove past my hiding spot, I sank lower in my seat, but I could see Noah's face through the passenger window. My bright, cheerful grandson looked like he'd been crying. After they disappeared around the corner, I sat in my car for another 30 minutes, staring at that house and trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Someone was definitely in that basement. Someone Noah had been conditioned to visit regularly. Someone who knew stories about Eric's childhood. But who could it be? And why was this person hidden away like a secret? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the quiet street, I made another decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to find a way into that house. I was going to discover who was in that basement. I needed to know if Grandma Evelyn was real, who she was, and why my daughter-in-law was keeping her existence a secret from our family. Whatever I found down there, I had a feeling it was going to change everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. Friday morning, I drove back to Elm Street with my heart hammering and a plan that scared me more than anything I'd ever done. I'd spent the previous day doing reconnaissance, learning that Tasha worked at the real estate office on Fridays and Noah was in school. If I was going to investigate that basement, today was my only chance. The house looked even more forlorn in the morning light. Paint peeled from the siding like old skin, and the yard was overgrown with weeds that suggested no one cared about maintaining appearances. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back, carrying a clipboard and wearing my most official-looking blazer, hoping anyone who saw me would assume I was conducting some kind of survey. My hands shook as I approached the side yard where I'd seen Noah and Tasha disappear. Hidden behind overgrown bushes was exactly what I'd suspected, a separate entrance leading down concrete steps to a basement door. The steps were cracked and stained, and the metal handrail was rusty from years of neglect. I stood at the top of those steps for a full minute listening. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and a dog barking several houses away. Taking a deep breath that felt like it might be my last as an innocent woman, I descended into what felt like a descent into hell itself. The basement door was painted a faded green and had 3 deadbolt locks on the outside. 3 locks, to keep someone in, not to keep intruders out. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the handrail to keep from falling. I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily. Apparently, Tasha felt secure enough to leave it unlocked during the day, confident that whoever was inside couldn't escape through 3 deadbolts, even if they could reach the door handle. The door opened with a creak that sounded like a scream in the silence. Musty air rushed out, carrying scents of dampness, medication, and something else I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach clench with dread. I stepped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through 2 small, dirty windows near the ceiling. What I saw made me press my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp of horror. It was a basement, but it had been converted into what could only be described as a prison cell, disguised as a living space. There was a hospital bed, a small table with medications lined up like soldiers, a portable toilet behind a makeshift curtain, and a single lamp that cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. And in that hospital bed lay an elderly black woman who made my blood turn to ice water. She was thin, too thin, with gray hair that had once been carefully styled but now lay limp against a pillow that should have been changed weeks ago. Her dark skin had an unhealthy pallor, and when she turned toward the sound of my footsteps, her eyes held a mixture of hope and fear that nearly broke my heart. "Tasha?" she called, out in a voice barely above a whisper. "Did you bring Noah today? I've been waiting." I moved closer, and she focused on my face with obvious confusion. "You're not Tasha. Who are you? Are you here to help me?" The desperation in her voice was like a knife to my chest. I knelt beside her bed, taking in the details that painted a picture of systematic abuse and neglect. Empty medicine bottles, a water pitcher that needed refilling, blankets that were clean but threadbare. "My name is Clara Jenkins," I said gently. "I'm Noah's grandmother." Her eyes widened, and she tried to sit up straighter. "Noah's grandmother? But I'm Noah's grandmother. I'm Evelyn Reed. I've been Noah's grandmother since he was born." The words hit me like a freight train. "Mrs. Reed, how long have you been down here?" "Down here?" She looked around as if seeing her surroundings for the first time. "This is my home. Tasha told me the upstairs was damaged in a fire, so I have to stay down here until it's repaired. But that was..." She paused, confusion clouding her features. "How long ago was that?" I felt sick. "Mrs. Reed, what's the last thing you remember about your family?" Her voice became small, childlike. "Tasha told me that Eric and Noah died in a car accident 3 years ago. She said I was so grief-stricken that I had a breakdown, and that's why I'm sick now. She's been taking care of me ever since, helping me remember things gradually so I don't get overwhelmed." The lies were so elaborate, so cruel, that I had to fight back tears. "Mrs. Reed, Eric is alive. Noah is alive. They're both healthy and well. I'm Eric's mother, which would make you..." The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. You're Eric's biological mother, aren't you? The one he never talks about? She nodded slowly. Eric is my son. I raised him until he was 18. Then he moved away for college and we lost touch for a while. But when Tasha contacted me 3 years ago saying they wanted me to be part of Noah's life, I was so happy. I thought my son had forgiven me for whatever I'd done wrong. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Tasha had found Eric's estranged mother, convinced her that her family was dead, and imprisoned her in this basement while collecting Social Security benefits, insurance payments, or whatever financial gains came from keeping Evelyn Reed officially alive, but hidden from the world. Mrs. Reed, I said, my voice shaking with rage and compassion, I need to get you out of here right now. But even as I said the words, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, a car door slamming in the driveway above us. The sound of footsteps on the basement stairs sent ice through my veins. I pressed my finger to my lips, signaling Mrs. Reed to stay quiet, and quickly moved behind the staircase just as the door creaked open. Evelyn, I brought your medications, Tasha's voice echoed down the stairs, sickeningly sweet. How are we feeling today? I watched through the gap between the stairs as Tasha descended with a pharmacy bag and a bottle of water. She moved with practiced efficiency, like this was a routine she'd performed hundreds of times. Oh, Tasha, dear, Mrs. Reed said, her voice gaining strength. I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that Eric was still alive, and that I had another daughter-in-law named Clara. Tasha's laugh was sharp, cruel. Now, Evelyn, we've talked about this. Those dreams aren't real. They're just your mind trying to cope with the grief. Eric and Noah died 3 years ago, remember? I'm all the family you have left. From my hiding spot, I watched Tasha pull out several pill bottles and begin sorting medication into Mrs. Reed's hand. Too many pills. Far too many for someone who appeared to have no serious medical conditions beyond malnutrition and depression. These new pills will help with the confusion, Tasha continued. Dr. Martinez says they'll make the dreams stop. Dr. Martinez. I filed that name away, suspecting he was either part of this scheme or being deceived himself. Tasha, Mrs. Reed said hesitantly, sometimes I feel like I'm missing something important. Like there are people I should remember but can't. That's just the grief, sweetheart. The trauma damaged your memory. But don't worry. I'm keeping track of everything for you. Your Social Security benefits, your pension, your insurance policies. I make sure all your bills are paid and you're taken care of. The casual mention of financial benefits confirmed my worst suspicions. Tasha wasn't just keeping Mrs. Reed prisoner out of cruelty. She was profiting from it. Speaking of which, Tasha continued, pulling out a stack of papers, I need you to sign a few things. Just routine paperwork to keep your affairs in order. I crept closer, straining to see what documents Mrs. Reed was being asked to sign. Bank authorizations, insurance forms, what looked like a power of attorney renewal. What's this one? Mrs. Reed asked, squinting at a paper. Oh, that's just updating your will, making sure everything goes to the right people when the time comes. Since Eric and Noah are gone, it makes sense that I handle your estate, doesn't it? I'm the only one who cares about you now. My hands clenched into fists. Tasha was systematically stealing this woman's entire life while convincing her that her family was dead. Now take your pills like a good girl, Tasha said, handing over the water bottle. And remember, if anyone ever comes asking questions, you tell them you're my Aunt Evelyn who's been living with me since your breakdown. We can't have strangers interfering with your recovery, can we? Mrs. Reed dutifully swallowed the pills, and I watched as her eyelids began to droop almost immediately. Whatever Tasha was giving her was designed to keep her compliant and confused. That's my good girl, Tasha cooed, stroking Mrs. Reed's hair with false tenderness. Now get some rest. I'll be back tomorrow with Noah. He loves visiting his sick great-aunt. Great-aunt, not grandmother. Even to a 7-year-old child, Tasha was spinning lies to cover her tracks. As Mrs. Reed's breathing deepened into drugged sleep, Tasha gathered the signed papers and headed back toward the stairs. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my heart hammering so loud I was certain she'd hear it. But Tasha was already focused on her next task, pulling out her phone as she climbed the stairs. "It's me," she said into the phone. "The old lady signed everything. Yes, the new will is in place. If something happens to her, I inherit everything as her only surviving relative." A pause. "No, Eric still doesn't suspect anything. As far as he knows, his birth mother is still dead to him." The basement door slammed shut, followed by the distinctive click of 3 deadbolts sliding into place. I waited in the darkness for 10 minutes before emerging from my hiding spot. Mrs. Reed was unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Those pills weren't just for confusion. They were keeping her weak, dependent, and unable to think clearly enough to question her situation. Moving quietly, I began photographing everything with my phone. The makeshift prison, the excessive medications, the legal documents scattered on the bedside table. Each image was evidence of a crime so elaborate and heartless that I could barely wrap my mind around it. Tasha had found Eric's estranged biological mother, convinced her that her family was dead, and turned her into a source of income while keeping her imprisoned in conditions that would be illegal for an animal, let alone a human being. But the most chilling part was the mention of, if something happens to her. Tasha wasn't planning to keep Mrs. Reed alive indefinitely. She was planning to let her die, collecting inheritance money while Eric never knew his biological mother had been alive and desperate to see him again. As I prepared to leave, I knelt beside Mrs. Reed's bed one more time. "I'm going to get you out of here," I whispered. "Your son Eric is alive. Your grandson Noah is beautiful and healthy, and they're going to know the truth about what happened to you." The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more. I needed to catch Tasha in the act to document the full scope of her crimes, and I had a plan that would expose everything. Over the next 3 days, I became someone I never thought I could be: a detective, a spy, and a woman with a mission that consumed every waking moment. I had stumbled onto a crime so elaborate that I needed irrefutable proof before I could expose it. First, I visited the county courthouse and spent hours in the records department, tracing property ownership and financial documents. What I discovered made my stomach turn. The house on Elm Street was registered to Evelyn Reed's Family Trust, with Tasha Jenkins listed as the trustee and primary beneficiary. Mrs. Reed had supposedly transferred ownership of her home, her savings, and her life insurance policies to this trust in the months following her alleged breakdown. The paperwork was expertly forged or coerced, but it painted a clear picture. Tasha had systematically taken control of every aspect of Mrs. Reed's financial life while keeping her imprisoned and convincing her that her family was dead. Next, I drove to the Department of Social Services and claimed to be researching family genealogy. A sympathetic clerk helped me access public records that showed Mrs. Reed was listed as receiving disability benefits for severe depression and dementia, conditions that conveniently required a guardian to manage her affairs. That guardian was Tasha Jenkins, who had been collecting and depositing Mrs. Reed's monthly checks for over 2 years. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: Noah himself. On Sunday afternoon, when Eric brought Noah for our regular visit, I gently steered the conversation toward his Wednesday activities. "Noah, honey, can you tell Grandma Clara more about the stories the sick lady tells you?" His face lit up with innocent enthusiasm. "Oh, she tells the best stories about Daddy when he was little, like how he broke his arm falling out of the big oak tree when he was 9, and how he used to hide vegetables under his plate because he didn't like green beans." My heart stopped. Those were stories only Eric's biological mother would know, stories Eric had shared with me years ago about his childhood, before he came to live with my late husband and me, when his birth mother couldn't care for him anymore. "And she shows me pictures too," Noah continued, "old pictures of Daddy in his baseball uniform and at his high school graduation. She cries when she looks at them and says she misses him so much." Pictures. Physical evidence that Mrs. Reed was exactly who I suspected she was. "Noah," I said carefully, "does Mama Tasha know about the pictures?" He shook his head. "The sick lady hides them when Mama Tasha comes down. She says Mama Tasha gets upset when she talks too much about old times. That evening, after Eric picked up Noah, I made the most difficult decision of this entire nightmare. I was going back to that basement, but this time I was going to stay long enough to get everything I needed. Monday morning, I waited until I was certain Tasha had left for work, then returned to Elm Street with a plan. I brought a digital camera with a flash, a voice recorder, and enough courage to do what needed to be done. Mrs. Reed was more alert than she'd been during my first visit, probably because it had been longer since her last dose of whatever medications Tasha was using to keep her compliant. "Clara," she said as I descended the stairs, "you came back. I was afraid I'd dreamed you." "I'm real, Mrs. Reed, and I'm here to help you remember some things. Can you show me the pictures Noah mentioned?" With shaking hands, she reached under her mattress and pulled out a small photo album wrapped in a pillowcase to protect it from dampness. The photos inside made me cry on the spot. There was Eric at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning in a Little League uniform. Eric at his high school graduation, young and proud in his cap and gown. Eric on his 18th birthday, standing next to a woman who looked exactly like Mrs. Reed, but younger and healthier. "I kept these when Tasha told me to pack up my old life," Mrs. Reed said quietly. She said looking at them would make my grief worse, but I couldn't throw them away. He's my baby, my only child. I photographed every picture, every page of the album, while Mrs. Reed told me stories that only a mother would know. Eric's fear of thunderstorms as a child, his love of strawberry ice cream, the way he used to sing himself to sleep when he was scared. "Mrs. Reed," I said gently, "I need to ask you some hard questions, and I need you to answer them while I record your voice. Can you do that for me?" For the next 30 minutes, I recorded Mrs. Reed describing her life before the basement, her relationship with Eric, and everything she could remember about how Tasha had convinced her to sign over her assets and move into this temporary living situation. The most heartbreaking part was when she asked, "Clara, is my son really alive? Is my grandson really okay? Because sometimes I feel like Tasha is lying to me, but the pills make it so hard to think clearly." "They're both alive and well," I assured her, "and they're going to know the truth about what happened to you." As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Reed grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Please don't let her give me any more pills. I want to think clearly when I see Eric again. I want to remember how to be his mother." I promised her that the pills would stop, that the lies would end, and that she would see her son again soon. But first, I had one more task. I was going to confront Tasha, and I was going to do it in a way that would leave her no room to deny what she'd done. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were clear. The photos were undeniable. It was time for justice. I chose Thursday evening for the confrontation, timing it perfectly for when Eric would be home from work, but before Noah's bedtime. I needed my son to hear the truth while our grandson was safely occupied in another room, protected from the devastating revelations that were about to shatter our family's foundation. I arrived at Eric and Tasha's house with a manila folder containing photographs, legal documents, and a flash drive with Mrs. Reed's recorded testimony. My hands were steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. After days of horror and discovery, I felt strangely calm, like a storm that had finally found its center. "Mom!" Eric opened the door with his usual warm smile, still wearing his construction company uniform. "What a nice surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight." "I need to talk to you and Tasha," I said quietly. "It's important." Something in my tone made his smile falter. "Is everything okay? You look serious." "Where's Noah?" "Upstairs playing video games." "Mom, you're worrying me." Tasha appeared in the doorway behind Eric, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like panic when she saw the folder in my hands. "Clara, what brings you by so late?" Her voice was artificially bright, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "We need to sit down," I said, "all three of us." In the living room, I placed the manila folder on the coffee table between us and looked directly at Eric. "Son, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to listen to everything before you react." Eric leaned forward, concern etching lines around his eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph. Mrs. Reed in her basement prison, lying on that hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment and locked doors. "Eric, do you recognize this woman?" He stared at the photo, his face going pale. That looks like my birth mother, but that's impossible. She died years ago." "No, son, she didn't die. She's been alive this entire time, imprisoned in a basement on Elm Street while your wife has been systematically stealing her life." The words hit the room like an explosion. Eric's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then growing horror as he looked from the photo to Tasha. "That's ridiculous," Tasha said, but her voice was shaking. "Clara, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but—" "It's not a game," I interrupted, pulling out more photos. "This is your signature on forged power of attorney documents. This is your name on bank accounts that have been receiving Mrs. Reed's Social Security and pension benefits. And this," I pulled out a copy of the property deed, "is proof that you've stolen her house and her life savings." Eric stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on here, Tasha? Explain this to me right now." Tasha's composure was cracking. "Eric, honey, your mother is obviously having some kind of breakdown. These documents could be fabricated. And I suppose Noah fabricated this too?" I played the voice recording I'd made of Noah describing his visits to see the sick grandma who knows stories about Daddy. Eric's voice came through the speakers, young and innocent. "She shows me pictures of Daddy when he was little and tells me about when he broke his arm in the big oak tree." The color drained completely from Eric's face. "Only my birth mother knew about that tree. Only she had those pictures." "Because it is your birth mother, Eric. Mrs. Evelyn Reed is alive, and she's been asking about you for 3 years while Tasha convinced her that you and Noah died in a car accident." I played Mrs. Reed's recorded testimony, her frail voice filling the room. "Eric is my son. I raised him until he was 18. I never stopped loving him, never stopped hoping we'd reconnect someday." Eric sank back into his chair like he'd been physically struck. "She's alive? My mother is alive and thinks I'm dead?" "Not just alive," I continued, pulling out the medical evidence. "She's being drugged daily with medications that keep her confused and compliant. She's been imprisoned in that basement while Tasha collects her benefits and slowly kills her for inheritance money." "You're lying," Tasha finally exploded, jumping to her feet. "This is all lies and fabrication and—" "Then explain this," I said, playing the recording I'd made of Tasha's phone conversation about inheriting everything when something happens to her. Tasha's voice came through the speakers, clear and damning. "If something happens to her, I inherit everything as her only surviving relative." The room fell into dead silence except for the ticking of the mantel clock and Eric's labored breathing. "You've been killing my mother," Eric said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been torturing her, stealing from her, and letting me believe she was dead while you... He couldn't finish the sentence. He put his head in his hands and made a sound I'd never heard from my son before, a keening wail of grief and rage and betrayal. "Eric, please, let me explain," Tasha started. "Explain what?" Eric looked up at her with eyes full of fury. "Explain how you found my estranged mother and decided to imprison her for money. Explain how you've been taking our son to visit his dying grandmother while telling her that her family is dead. Explain how you've been collecting thousands of dollars in benefits from a woman you're slowly murdering." "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Tasha broke down completely, tears streaming down her face. "I found her through public records when I was researching your family history. She was lonely, isolated, and she had money. I thought if she signed over power of attorney, I could help manage her affairs and maybe take a small fee for my services." "A small fee?" I stood up, my own anger finally breaking through. "You stole her house, her savings, her Social Security, her pension, and her dignity. You convinced her that her son was dead and locked her in a basement like an animal." "She was already confused," Tasha screamed. "She already had memory problems. I just made it easier for everyone." "Easier for who?" Eric's voice was deadly quiet. "Easier for you to steal from a helpless old woman? Easier for you to let me live with the guilt of never reconciling with my mother? Easier for you to traumatize our son by making him complicit in abuse?" The front door burst open, and I realized I'd forgotten the most important part of my plan. "Police! Nobody move!" Detective Isabella Garcia entered with 2 uniformed officers, having received my call earlier requesting they arrive exactly 1 hour after I started the confrontation. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Detective Garcia approached me. "Do you have the evidence you mentioned?" I handed her the manila folder. "Everything you need is right there, Detective. Financial fraud, elder abuse, false imprisonment, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder." As the officers began reading Tasha her rights, Eric looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, is she really alive? Is my mother really still alive?" "She's alive, son, and she's been waiting 3 years to see you again." 6 months later, I sat in a courthouse watching Tasha Jenkins receive a sentence of 15 years in prison for elder abuse, financial fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. This represents one of the most calculated and cruel cases of elder abuse this court has ever seen. But the real victory had happened much earlier, on that November evening when Eric first walked into Mrs. Reed's basement hospital room and whispered, "Mom, it's me. It's Eric." I'll never forget the moment Mrs. Reed's eyes focused on her son's face, free from the fog of unnecessary medications for the first time in 3 years. She reached up with trembling hands to touch his cheeks, as if confirming he was real. "My baby," she whispered. "They told me you were dead. They told me you and Noah died in a car accident." Eric broke down completely, kneeling beside her bed and sobbing into her lap like the frightened little boy he'd once been. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I never came looking for you. I thought you didn't want to see me." "I never stopped wanting to see you," Mrs. Reed said, stroking his hair. "Not for a single day in 30 years. The reunion between Mrs. Reed and Noah was equally emotional. When Noah saw his sick grandma sitting up in a real hospital bed instead of that basement prison, he ran to her with pure joy. "Grandma Evelyn, you look so much better. Are you not sick anymore?" "I'm getting better every day, sweetheart," she said, hugging him close. "And now I know why. It's because my family found me." The medical recovery was challenging but remarkable. Dr. Michael Vance, the therapist we'd hired to help Noah process the trauma, also worked with Mrs. Reed to address the psychological damage from 3 years of systematic abuse and drugging. Attorney Sarah Price handled the complex legal work of recovering Mrs. Reed's stolen assets and ensuring that every dollar Tasha had taken was returned with interest. Detective Isabella Garcia told us that our case had led to a broader investigation into elder abuse schemes, resulting in the arrest of 2 other individuals who had been working with Tasha to identify and exploit isolated elderly victims. "Mrs. Jenkins," Detective Garcia said to me during one of our follow-up meetings, "your courage in investigating this situation probably saved Mrs. Reed's life. According to the medical evidence, she wouldn't have survived another 6 months in those conditions." The financial recovery was substantial. Mrs. Reed's house was returned to her, along with over $180,000 in stolen benefits and savings. But more importantly, she had her family back. Eric moved Mrs. Reed into the guest room of his house, converting it into a comfortable suite where she could recover while being close to her son and grandson. The transformation was miraculous. Within weeks of proper nutrition and medical care, she was walking steadily, thinking clearly, and reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. "Clara," she said to me one afternoon as we watched Noah and Eric work together in the garden, "I don't know how to thank you for giving me my family back." "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "You're Noah's grandmother. That makes you family, and family protects family." The impact on Noah required careful handling with Dr. Vance's guidance. We explained that Mama Tasha had been sick in a way that made her do bad things, and that sometimes adults make very wrong choices that hurt other people. Noah's resilience amazed us all. Within a few months, he was calling Mrs. Reed Grandma Evelyn naturally and had integrated her into his life as if she'd always been there. "I have 2 grandmas now," he announced proudly at school. "Grandma Clara makes the best cookies, and Grandma Evelyn tells the best stories about when Daddy was little." Eric struggled the most with guilt and anger. "How could I have been so blind?" he asked me repeatedly. "How could I not have known what Tasha was doing?" "Because you trusted your wife," I told him, "because you believed that the woman you married was capable of love, not capable of the kind of evil we discovered. That trust doesn't make you weak, Eric. It makes you human." With Dr. Vance's help, Eric gradually worked through his emotions and focused on building a relationship with his mother. They talked through old hurts and misunderstandings, bridging the gap that had separated them for so long. Mrs. Reed, meanwhile, bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight. She started cooking again, sharing family recipes with me and teaching Noah about his heritage. She began writing in a journal, documenting her memories of Eric's childhood so they wouldn't be lost again. "I lost 3 years," she told me one evening, "but I've been given back the rest of my life. That's a trade I'll take any day." The legal battles continued for months beyond Tasha's sentencing. Attorney Sarah Price worked tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the fraud was uncovered and rectified. We discovered that Tasha had also been claiming Mrs. Reed as a dependent on her taxes, collecting additional refunds worth thousands of dollars annually. The IRS investigation resulted in criminal tax fraud charges and an additional $75,000 in penalties and interest that Tasha would owe upon her eventual release from prison. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came 6 weeks after Tasha's arrest, when Detective Garcia called to inform us that Mrs. Reed wasn't Tasha's only victim. The investigation had uncovered evidence of at least 3 other elderly individuals who had been targeted by Tasha's elaborate schemes over the past 5 years. "Your case broke open an entire elder abuse network," Detective Garcia explained during a visit to Mrs. Reed's new home. Tasha had been working with a corrupt social worker and a dishonest doctor to identify vulnerable seniors, then systematically isolate and exploit them. Mrs. Reed was just the most recent victim. The scope of Tasha's crimes was staggering. She had stolen nearly $500,000 from elderly victims using forged documents, fake medical diagnoses, and elaborate lies to convince families that their loved ones were either dead or beyond help. 2 of her previous victims had actually died in her care, their deaths attributed to natural causes until our case prompted exhumation orders and thorough investigations. Mrs. Reed took this news with surprising strength. "Those poor souls," she said, tears in her eyes. "At least they can rest in peace now, knowing the truth has come out, and maybe their families can find some closure." The media attention that followed our story was both overwhelming and gratifying. Local news stations picked up the case, and soon we were receiving calls from families across the country who suspected similar schemes had been perpetrated against their elderly relatives. Mrs. Reed became an advocate for elder abuse awareness, speaking at community centers and senior facilities about the warning signs of financial exploitation. "I survived this nightmare for a reason," she told audiences. "Maybe it was so I could help prevent it from happening to others." Eric's transformation throughout this ordeal was remarkable to witness. The guilt and anger that had consumed him initially gave way to fierce protectiveness and deep appreciation for second chances. He started a support group for families dealing with elder abuse, meeting monthly in our church basement to share resources and emotional support. "I almost lost my mother twice," he would tell other group members, "once when I was 18 and didn't know how to maintain our relationship, and again, when Tasha stole her from me. I'm not wasting any more time being angry about the past. I'm focusing on making the most of every day we have together." Mrs. Reed's integration into our family brought unexpected joy and wisdom to all our lives. She taught Noah about his African heritage, sharing stories and traditions that Eric had never learned. She helped me perfect my cornbread recipe and shared techniques for preserving family memories through storytelling and photo organization. Most importantly, she brought a sense of completeness to our family that we hadn't even realized was missing. Sunday dinners became sacred gatherings where 3 generations shared laughter, memories, and plans for the future. As I watched our expanded family around the dinner table last Sunday, Eric carving the roast, Mrs. Reed teaching Noah to fold napkins properly, everyone laughing at one of Noah's elaborate stories about school, I realized that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the most unexpected blessings. Tasha had intended to destroy a family for money. Instead, her crimes had reunited a mother and son, given Noah a second grandmother who adored him, and shown all of us the true meaning of family loyalty. Justice had been served in the courtroom, but healing had happened around our kitchen table, one shared meal and one recovered memory at a time. The ripple effects of our story continued to spread, bringing justice to other victims and their families, raising awareness about elder abuse, and proving that sometimes one person's courage to speak up can change multiple lives forever. And that, I realized, was the most important victory of all. Thank you so much for staying until the end. Your support keeps this channel alive. Please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Until the next story, take care.